The cow died at the place where the river used to be. I want to start there because that is where it started to come undone for me. The easy way I had of seeing the world. The way I'd inherited from my father along with his bad knees and his bad temper and his certainty that the land owed a working man a fair shake. She was one of my best heifers, a red Hereford cross with a white blaze, and she had walked all the way down into the dry channel of the San Pedro the way cattle do when their bodies still remember water in a place that has none. She had stood there in the cracked mud, in those gray plates of dried river the size of dinner platters, and she had bawled at the memory of it, and then her legs had quit and she had gone down. By the time I rode up on her she had stopped trying. The flies were already at the corners of her eyes. She blinked, slow, like a person falling asleep in church. I sat my horse and I looked at her for a long while. I'm not a man who cries over stock. You can't be in this business. You drown. But I had bottle raised that heifer 2 winters back when her mother rejected her, and I had named her, which is the first mistake a rancher makes, and I had called her Biscuit because she was the color of a good biscuit, and because I was lonely that winter and a man will talk to anything that listens. And now Biscuit was dying in the bottom of a dead river, and I had not one swallow of water on me to give her, because there wasn't one swallow of water to be had between my place and the foothills. I got down. I knelt in the cracked mud beside her. I put my hand flat on her neck and I felt the heat coming off her, that wrong heat, the heat of an engine running with no oil in it. And I did the only thing I had left to do, which was to take out my pistol and end it. And I want you to understand that I am telling you this not to shock you, but because you cannot understand the rest of this story. You cannot understand what the orchard meant to me later when everything turned, unless you understand first what the drought was. The drought was not a hardship. A hardship is something you complain about. The drought was a slow killing of every living thing I had spent my life building, one animal at a time, in front of my own eyes, and there was nothing in heaven or earth I could do to stop it. I buried her with my hands, more or less, scraping that iron dirt over her, knowing the coyotes would dig her up by nightfall. It was a foolish thing to do. I did it anyway. That was the second summer of the dry. Now I have to go back because a story told straight through is a lie. Nothing happens in a line. It happens in loops, the way you keep circling back to the moment you should have known better and didn't. I have to go back to the spring before the drought, the last green spring, when the worst thing in my life was the price of beef, and the only Apache I thought about was the kind in the dime novels my nephew sent me from back east, feathers and war paint and bloody-minded savagery, none of which I had ever once seen with my own eyes in 11 years on that land, though I'd have told you I had, because that's what you told people. That's what we all told people. It made us feel braver about being scared of nothing. His name, I would learn much later, was Dasodahi, though the men around the valley called him the Peach Indian, and worse things than that, and I will not write the worst things here. He was one of the few who had not been taken north to the reservations after the surrenders, or who had been taken and slipped back, nobody quite knew which, and the soldiers either hadn't found him or had decided he wasn't worth the trouble of finding. He lived alone up in the broken country at the foot of the Galliuros, in a fold of land where the limestone had collapsed in some ancient age and left a great sinkhole. A wound in the earth maybe 90 feet across and 40 deep, with sloping sides on the south end where a man or a goat could pick his way down, and sheer rock on the north where the cliff swallows nested. And in the bottom of that hole, in the cool blue shadow of it, he had planted peach trees. I first saw it the way most of us first saw it, as a joke. Coming back from a cattle sale in the spring of that last good year, 3 or 4 of us, riding loose and full of beer from the saloon in Mammoth, and one of the Tully boys says, "You want to see the craziest damn thing in the territory," and we follow him up into that broken country, our horses picking sour at the loose rock, and he brings us to the lip of this sinkhole and says, "Look down there." And we looked down. I will tell you, even drunk and even ready to laugh, the first sight of it stopped something in my chest. Down in that hole, in a world the sun only reached for a few hours at midday, there was a garden. Not a wild thing. A made thing. Rows. Maybe 24 peach trees in careful rows, and they were in blossom, and from up on the lip where we stood it looked like somebody had spilled a sky full of pink down into the dark of the earth. There were other things growing too, squash, I think, and corn coming up in the sunnier patches, and beans climbing the dead trees he'd left standing as poles. And there was a man down there, small with the distance, moving among the trees with a clay jar, watering them one at a time, slow, patient, like a man visiting graves. Peach Indian, Tully says and spits. Plants 'em in a hole. You ever hear of such a thing? Crop wants sun. Everybody knows a crop wants sun. He's got 'em down in the dark like mushrooms. And we laughed. Lord, we laughed. We sat our horses on the rim of that hole and we laughed down at that man. And I remember he stopped his watering and he stood very still and he looked up at us. Not afraid, not angry, just looking. The way you'd look at weather coming, and then he went back to his trees as if we were not there at all. As if we were the foolish ones up on the hot rim with our hot horses, and he was the one with sense, down in the cool with his garden. That look, I carried that look home with me. I lay awake turning it over. There was something in it I could not put a name to, and not being able to name a thing has always been, for me, a kind of itch. I want to be honest about who I was, because the story is no good if I make myself out better than I was. I went back, alone, 3 or 4 times over that spring and summer, telling myself I was checking the high pasture, which was a lie, because no cattle in their right mind would climb to that broken country, and there was no reason on earth for me to be up there except the itch. I would tie my horse a ways off, and I would creep up to the rim of that sinkhole like a boy spying on something he's been told not to look at, and I would watch the Peach Indian work. He worked like no man I had ever seen. There was no hurry in him, and there was no rest in him either. He had dug by hand. It had to be by hand. There was no other way to get a mule down in there. He had dug channels in the floor of that sinkhole, little ditches that ran from the deepest shadowed corner out to each tree, and I came to understand, watching, that there was water seeping out of the rock down there. Not much. A weep, a sweat of the stone, where the rains of better years had soaked down through the limestone and come slow to the surface at the lowest point. A spring so small you would never call it a spring. And he had found it, and he had bent his whole life around it. He caught it in a stone basin he had built, and he carried it tree to tree in that clay jar, and he never spilled a drop. The shade of the deep hole kept the water from burning off the way it does up top, where you can pour a bucket on the ground at noon and watch it vanish like a ghost before it soaks an inch. Down there in the cool, the water stayed. The earth held it. The trees drank slow. He was not hiding his crop from the sun because he was a fool. He was hiding his crop from the sun because he understood something about that country that not one of us laughing white men understood, for all our deeds and our fences and our certainty, that in a land of fire the great enemy is not the cold, it is the thirst, and the man who saves his water saves his life. I did not understand all of this at once. I'm making it sound cleaner than it was. At the time I only saw a strange Indian doing strange patient work in a hole, and I felt that itch, and underneath the itch, and this shames me to write, underneath it I felt the small mean satisfaction of a man who has decided someone else is a fool, because it is easier to call a man a fool than to ask yourself why he might be wise. The first time he caught me, he did not run me off. It was high summer, the last good summer, and I had gotten careless and crept too close to the south slope. And a rock turned under my boot and went bounding down into the hole, and he straightened up from his trees and he looked right at me. There was no point pretending. I stood up, all 6 foot of me, feeling like a fool caught at the keyhole, and I touched my hat brim because I did not know what else to do. He looked at me a long moment. Then, and I swear this is true, he raised one hand and motioned me down. Come down, the way you'd wave in a neighbor. I should have gone home. Every story I had ever been told said go home. But the itch was stronger than the fear, and I picked my way down that south slope, sliding the last of it on my heels, and I stood up in the bottom of the world among his peach trees, and the air down there. I have never forgotten the air down there. Up on the rim it was 110, and the wind came off the desert like the breath of a stove. Down in that hole it was cool and damp, and it smelled of green growing things and turned earth, and faint underneath, the mineral smell of the wet rock. It was like stepping out of August into May. It was like the land had a secret heart, hidden down in its chest, and he had found the door to it. He was older than I'd thought from the rim. Gray in his hair, deep lines, but his hands, when I got close, were a young man's hands, hard and quick and sure. He looked at me with those steady eyes, and he said something in his own tongue which I did not understand. And then he said in slow, rough Spanish, which I half understood, agua, and he pointed at the little stone basin, and he held out the clay jar to me, and I understood that he was offering me a drink. And I will tell you the thing I am most ashamed of in this whole account. I did not take the water. I stood in that man's garden, the one cool green place in a dying world, and he offered me a drink from the one small spring he had spent his life tending, the most generous thing one man can offer another in that country. And I thought of Tully and the boys and what they would say if they knew I'd taken water from the hand of the Peach Indian, and I shook my head, and I muttered something. And I climbed back up out of that hole, and I rode home with my throat dry and my heart smaller than it had been when I rode out. I have done many things in my life I am not proud of. That is the one I would take back first if I could only take back one. Not because of what it cost him nothing. He simply lowered the jar and went back to his trees, unsurprised, a man long used to the smallness of his neighbors. It is because of what it told me about myself, and I did not want to know it, and I spent a long time after that not thinking about it at all, which is a thing men are very good at, right up until the day the world stops letting them. Then the rains did not come. You do not notice a drought begin. That is the cruelty of it. There is no flood, no fire, no single day you can point to. There is only a July that should have brought the monsoon storms and brought instead a sky of high white haze and a heat that did not break at night. Then in August the same. Then the fall dry when the fall is always dry, so you tell yourself it is only the season. Then a winter with no snow on the Galliuros, no snow to melt and feed the river in the spring. Then a spring with the river already low, lower than the oldest man in the valley had ever seen it in spring. And then a summer that came down on us like the lid of an oven, and the river that had run in some form every day of my life on that land stopped running, and the pools in it shrank and turned green and then turned to mud, and then turned to those gray cracked plates, and the cattle began to die. By the second summer, the summer biscuit died in the dead river. There was no question left of waiting it out. Men were selling stock for nothing, for the price of bullets, just to stop watching them suffer. The Tully boys lost half their herd and then lost the other half and then lost the ranch and went to live with kin in Texas, and I never saw them again. The bank in Mammoth had more deeds than money. The desert was taking it all back, and it was taking it back the way it had always given it, slowly, indifferently, and with no thought at all for what we had wanted or worked for or named. And I would lie awake at night, listening to my well-pumped cough up less and less, listening to my cattle bawl in the dark for water I did not have, and into that black sleepless space, unbidden, would come the memory of a cool green hole in the broken country, and a clay jar held out in a steady brown hand, and a man who had bent his whole life around the saving of one small spring, while the rest of us spread ours thin across the burning ground and called him a fool. I did not want to think about him. I thought about him every single night. And one morning in the worst of it, with 3 head dead in the south pasture and my own tongue thick in my mouth and a desperation in me that had finally burned away the last of my pride, I saddled my horse before dawn, and I rode up into the broken country, toward the sinkhole, toward the orchard in the cave, with no plan in my head and no honest word in my mouth for what I had come to ask. Only the dim and shameful and entirely human hope that the man I had laughed at, the man whose water I had refused, might be the one man in all that dying valley with something left to give. I did not know yet what I would find down in that hole. I did not know that the drought which had taken so much from me was about to take something from him too, something I would help to take, and that before it was over I would have to choose, on the rim of that hole in the white killing light, between the man I had been and the man his garden was trying, against all my long resistance, to make of me. But that is the next part of it, and my hand is tired, and the memory is a heavy thing to carry far in one go. I will only say this to close the first part. When I came up over the last rise that morning and saw the lip of the sinkhole, and saw, rising out of it into the dead white sky, the green crowns of his peach trees, green, alive, bearing, in a world where nothing else was green for 40 miles in any direction. I stopped my horse, and I sat there, and for the first time since Biscuit died in the river I wept. Not from sorrow, from shame, and from something underneath the shame that I did not yet have the courage to call hope. He did not act surprised to see me. I have thought about that a great deal in the years since. A man living alone in broken country, far from any law that would protect him. A man whose people the army had hunted across 2 territories. That man should have reached for a weapon when a white rancher came up over the rise at dawn. Instead, he straightened from his work, and he looked at me on the rim the way he'd looked at me the first time, the way you look at weather, and then he went back to his trees. As if my coming were only the next thing that was always going to happen. As if he had been expecting me for 2 years, the way you expect a season. I came down the south slope on foot, leading my horse, because I could not make myself ride down into that place. It felt like a thing you walked into bareheaded. The cool came up to meet me the way it had before, that impossible May air rising out of the ground, and I stood among the peach trees, and I could not for a moment speak, because the trees were heavy with fruit. Small fruit, hard and green gold and not yet ripe, but fruit, clusters of it, weighing the branches down, in a world where I had not seen a living leaf in 2 months that wasn't gray with dust and dying. He watched me look at it. He let me look a long time. Then he said in that slow, rough Spanish, the first full sentence he ever said to me that I understood whole, "You did not take the water, so now the water comes to find you." I did not know what to say to that, so I said the truth. I said my cattle were dying. I said the river was dead. I said I had been a fool. I used that word, tonto, the word we had used on him. And I said I did not come to take anything, though God knows part of me had, and I said I did not rightly know why I had come at all. He listened to all of it, and then he held out the clay jar, the same jar or one like it, and this time I took it. I took it in both hands and I drank, and the water was cold and tasted of stone and of something green and faintly bitter, and it was the best thing I have ever put in my mouth before or since. And when I lowered the jar he was almost smiling, not at me, but at the jar, the way a man smiles at a tool that has done its work. "Now," he said, "you owe the spring, not me, the spring." And he handed me a second jar full and pointed at the far row of trees, and I understood that I was being put to work. I worked in his garden for 9 days before the trouble came. I want to set those 9 days down carefully, because they were among the best of my life, and a man does not get many that he can name like that. We did not talk much. We had little common tongue and less need of one. He showed me with his hands. He showed me how to carry the water without spilling. You do not hold the jar still. You let it ride loose in your grip and you walk smooth, and the water rides with you, and it was the same trick as riding a green horse, and once I understood that I never spilled again. He showed me how he watered. Not a flood at the base of each tree, which is what any white farmer would do, drowning the roots and losing half to the air. He watered slow, a thin steady trickle into the little channels he had dug, so the water walked sideways through the cool earth and found the roots low down where the sun could never steal it. He had been doing in that hole, for 30 years, with his hands in a clay jar, what I have since heard learned men with diplomas call the science of the desert. He had no diploma. He had paid attention. There is no diploma worth more than that. I learned the shape of his days. He rose before light and watered in the cool. Through the white heat of midday he sat in the deepest shade and mended things, baskets, the channels, a snare, and he slept a little, the way the desert teaches you to sleep in pieces like a coyote. In the long gold evening he watered again, and he sang low to himself or to the trees, I never knew which, a song with no edges to it that I can still hear if I go quiet enough. He saved seed from the best fruit, wrapping the pits in damp cloth, hanging them in the dark. He thought in years the way the rest of us thought in days. He was planting trees he might not live to eat from. I asked him once with my poor Spanish why a man would do that, plant for a harvest he would not see. He looked at me like I was a child who had asked why the sun came up. The man who planted these, he said, and put his hand on the oldest peach tree, the gnarled mother of them all, I did not know him. He was dead before I was born. He left them for whoever came. He patted the bark. I am whoever came, so. And he spread his hands at the rose, at the green fruit, at the whole improbable green heart of that hole in the burning ground. So, as if that one small word held the entire argument for being alive. I have built a good deal in my time. Fences, herds, a house, a name in the valley. I never built anything that answered the question of my own life as completely as that man answered it with one syllable and a hand on a tree. The trouble came up over the rim on the 10th day, and it came in the shape of men I knew. There were 4 of them. Cuthbert Vane, who ran the big spread on the Aravaipa and had lost more than any of us because he'd had more to lose. His foreman, a hard, pale man named Loomis, and 2 others, riders, with the gaunt, desperate look that everyone in the valley wore by then, the look of men watching their lives leak into the sand. They sat their horses on the rim, exactly where I had sat to laugh 2 springs before, and they looked down into the hole, and I watched the same thing happen to their faces that had happened to mine. The stopping, the disbelief. The green, the fruit, the water. But where I had felt shame, I watched them feel something else. I watched them feel that the water was theirs, that it had no business being down there in an Indian's hole while their cattle died up top, that the world had gotten the order of things wrong and they had ridden up to set it right. Crane, Vane called down, and there was an ugliness in how he said my name, finding me there. Crane, what in hell are you doing down in that hole with him? I climbed up. I did not want them down in the garden. I climbed the south slope and I stood on the rim with them, between them and the hole. Though I do not think I planned it that way, my body simply put itself there. Vane did not waste talk. There was no talk left in any of us by then. He said there was water down there, a spring, and the whole valley was dying for want of it. And the law of the land, he actually said that, the law of the land, as if the land had ever once cared for our laws. The law of the land said a resource like that could not be left to a single man, a single savage, when good families were going under for the lack of it. He said they meant to bring teams up, and timber and dig the spring out proper, widen it, run a pipe, make it serve. He said the Indian could stay on if he wanted or go, it made no difference, but the water was coming out of that hole and into the hands of men who had a right to it. And I understood, standing there in the white light with the cool of the garden still on my skin, that they would kill him. Not in so many words. They would not say it even to themselves. But they would dig out that spring, and they would tear out those careful channels, and they would flood the bottom of that hole and burn off in a week, under the open sky, the water that had taken 30 patient years, and a covered, shaded, conserving hand to keep. And they would learn far too late that the spring only flowed because it was small and slow and protected, that the moment they ripped the roof off the secret it would die in their grasping hands like a bird squeezed too hard, and the trees would die. And the man would die or be driven off to die elsewhere, and they would have destroyed the one living thing in the valley to feed the cattle for a single season, and then there would be nothing. Nothing for anyone. The fool's garden, made truly foolish at last by us. I knew all of this. I knew it the way you know a thing in your gut before your mouth has found the words. The hard part, The part I have to set down honestly is that for one long moment I wanted them to do it. I want to be honest about that moment, because if I am not honest about it, then everything I have written is just a man making himself out to be better than he was. Cuthbert Vane offered me, standing there on the rim, a share. He didn't have to say it plainly, men like Vane never do. He let his hand fall on my shoulder and he said the valley would remember who'd stood with the families, and there'd be water enough for all who stood right. And his eyes went down into the hole and then came back to me, and the offer was in them as clear as if he'd written it in a ledger. Stand with us. Help us take it, and your cattle live. And my cattle were dying. I want you to hold that in your mind, because it is easy to know the right thing when nothing is asked of you. My herd was the work of 11 years, and every dollar I had and every dollar I owed, and it was dying a head a day in the south pasture. And here was a man telling me there was a way to save it, that all I had to do was step aside, just step aside, and let stronger men do the thing that was going to happen anyway whether I helped or not. That last part is the devil's own argument, and I knew it even as it whispered to me, it will happen anyway. You stepping aside changes nothing for him and everything for you. You did not make this drought. You did not dig that spring. You owe him a drink of water, and you have drunk it back tenfold in 9 days of carrying jars. The account is square. Step aside. I have heard men say that when the test comes, you find out what you're made of. That has not been my experience. When the test came, I found out I was made of mud, the same as anyone, that I wanted to live and I wanted my herd to live, and I was perfectly capable of telling myself a smooth story about how the man in the hole was already as good as gone. The voice that wanted to step aside was not a stranger's voice. It was my own. It sounded exactly like me. That is the thing the dime novels never tell you. The villain, when you finally meet him, has your own face and your own reasons and your own dying cattle, and he is very, very persuasive. What saved me, and I will not dress this up as courage, because it was not courage, it was something smaller and stranger than courage. What saved me was the jar. I still had it in my hand. The second clay jar, the one he'd handed me on the first morning and put me to work with, still half full of spring water that I'd been carrying to the far row when the men rode up. I looked down, and there it was in my fist, cool and damp and heavy, and I thought, with no nobility in it at all, only a plain flat clarity. I cannot drink this man's water and then help these men kill him. I cannot. Whatever else I am, I cannot be that. There has to be one thing I will not do, or I am nothing. I am just mud the desert hasn't finished drying yet. It was not a grand thought. It came with no trumpets, but I have leaned my whole life on it since. The way you lean on a fence post you're not sure will hold, and it has held. I turned to Vane and I told him no. I will not pretend the words were fine. They were not. I said something like, "The spring's no good to you the way you mean to take it. You'll kill it. You'll kill it inside of a month, and then we're all worse off than before." I tried to make it about sense, about water, about the science of the thing I'd learned in 9 days of carrying jars, because I thought a man like Vane might hear sense even if he'd never in his life hear mercy. He didn't hear either. His hand came off my shoulder. His face closed like the sky had closed 2 summers before. He said I'd gone soft, or worse. He said it with a word I'll not repeat that meant I'd taken the Indian side against my own kind, and the 2 gaunt riders moved their horses up, and Loomis put his hand near his gun, casual, the way a man does when he wants you to see it without having to admit he's doing it. And here is where I have to leave it, on the rim, in the white light, 4 men against one with a clay jar, because what happened next happened fast, and it changed the shape of the rest of my life, and it deserves its own telling, not to be crammed in at the tired end of a long account. I will say only this, to carry you over to the last part of it. It was not me who turned them back. I had spoken my no, and my no was true, but my no would not have stopped 4 desperate armed men any more than a fence post stops a flood. What stopped them came from below. It came up out of the hole behind me. I heard the men's faces change before I understood why, saw their eyes go past me and down, and when I turned, Dasodahi was standing on the south slope, halfway up, in the full light for the first time since I'd known him, out of his garden, out of his cool blue shadow, standing where they could all see him plain. He was not holding a weapon. He was holding a peach. And what he did with it, and what it broke open in those men and in me, and the terrible quiet thing the drought asked of him in the end, the thing he gave, that none of us asked for and none of us deserved, that is the last of the story. My hand is tired again. The memory is heavier here than anywhere. But I'll tell it. I owe it to him to tell it whole. He climbed the slope slow. He did not hurry for them and he did not slink. He came up out of the cool into the killing light, and the light fell on him hard, and I saw how old he truly was, older than the garden had let him look, and how thin, and I understood for the first time that he had been giving the springs water to the trees before he gave it to himself. He had been carrying jars to the peaches while his own body went dry. A man can read another man's whole creed in a thing like that, if he troubles to look. He stopped a few feet below the rim, where they could all see him plain, and he held up the peach. It was the first ripe one. I had not even known there was a ripe one. He must have found it that morning, hidden it, been saving it for something. It was small and gold and flushed red on the sun's side, the way a good peach blushes, and in that gray dead country it was the most colored thing for 40 miles, redder than blood and softer than anything any of us had touched in 2 years. He did not throw it. He did not make a speech of it. He simply held it up so the light came through the fuzz of its skin, and he turned it slow in his fingers, and he looked at Cuthbert Vane, and he said, in Spanish slow enough for all of us to follow, "You want the water. The water is not the thing. The thing is the patience. I can give you the water and you will lose it in a month. I cannot give you the patience. No man can give another man the patience. You have to grow it yourself in the dark where no one praises you for it." And he reached out and he set the peach down on the lip of the rim on the bare rock in front of Vane's horse, and he stepped back down a pace, leaving it there. An offering, or a test, or both. I do not think he knew himself which. For a long moment no one moved. The peach sat on the hot rock between us all, small and gold and absurd. The whole argument of 2 summers and 30 years and 1 dead heifer reduced to a single piece of fruit on a stone. Then one of the gaunt riders, the younger one, a boy really, 16 or 17, a boy who had been watching his family stock die same as the rest of us, that boy got down off his horse. Slow. He picked up the peach. He looked at Vane and he looked at the old man on the slope, and then he bit into it, the way a starving thing bites, and the juice ran down his chin and dripped off into the dust, and he made a sound. I will never forget the sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a man makes when he had forgotten there was sweetness in the world and is reminded all at once. It was almost a sob. And that sound did what my no could not do, and what Dasodahi's words could not do, and what the gun on Loomis's hip could not do. It broke them. Not all at once and not cleanly. Vane did not soften. Men like Vane do not soften, they only calculate, and I saw him recalculate. Saw him understand that the boy had crossed over, that the riders had crossed over, that he could not now lead a party against one old man over a piece of fruit a child was weeping to eat, not without becoming a thing that even desperate men would not follow. He wheeled his horse. He said something hard about all of us being dead by fall, water or no water, sentiment or no sentiment, and in that at least he was nearly right. And he rode off down the broken country, and Loomis went after him, and the older rider went after Loomis. The boy stayed. He stayed 3 weeks in the end, working in the garden, carrying jars, learning the slow water the way I had learned it. And Dasodahi taught him the same way he'd taught me, with his hands, without praise, in the dark where no one was watching. I have wondered since whether that boy was the reason the old man stepped up into the light at all, whether he had looked at 4 men and a clay jar and the dying valley, and decided that if the garden was going to end, then by God it would end having handed itself to someone, having found its whoever came. I think that is exactly what he decided. I think he gave that peach to the only one of us young enough to carry the patience forward, and the rest of us were only there to witness it. But I am getting ahead, because the drought was not done with us. The drought is never done with you when you think it is. That is its last cruelty, and I should have known it, having buried Biscuit in the dead river. The rains broke that September. I want to be careful how I tell this, because there is a way to tell it that makes it a happy ending, and that way is a lie. The rains broke. After 2 years and a summer, the monsoon that had failed and failed came back all at once, the way the desert does nothing in moderation, and it came down on the Galliuros in walls of water, and the dry washes that had not run in 2 years ran in the dark like freight trains, and we stood out in it, all of us who were left, with our faces turned up and our mouths open, weeping and laughing like fools, saved. And the same flood that saved us killed the garden. I did not understand it at the time. I have had to have it explained to me since, by a man who studies water for the government, and even now I only half understand it, but it goes like this. That sinkhole, that great collapsed wound in the limestone, it was the low point of all the broken country around it. For 30 years the rains had come gently, soaking down slow through the stone, feeding the small protected spring at the bottom. But a flood is not a gentle rain. A flood comes off the hard-baked ground that 2 years of drought had turned to brick, and it does not soak in. It runs, and it runs downhill, and it finds the low place, and the low place was the hole. The garden drowned. The water came down the broken country in the dark, and it poured over the south slope and down the sheer north cliff in a falls that had never existed before and will likely never exist again. And it filled the bottom of that hole faster than any spring could fill it. And it tore out the careful channels, and it floated the mother peach tree off its 30-year roots, and it buried the rose under a churning brown lake the color of the dead river. By morning, the secret cool heart of the country was a pond of mud with the broken crowns of peach trees sticking out of it like the masts of a wrecked ship. The thing the drought spared, the rain destroyed. There is a sentence in that about the whole of life, and I have never been able to finish it. He was not in the hole when it flooded. I have held to that. The boy swore to it after, and I believe the boy. Dasota he had gone up onto high ground to watch the storm come in. The boy said the old man had stood on the rim in the first rain with his arms a little out from his sides, his face up, and he had laughed. The boy said, the only time the boy ever heard him laugh, because the rain had finally come, the rain he had waited 2 years for, the rain that was going to fill his little spring back up and make the carrying easier and let him plant the seed he'd been saving in the dark. He laughed at the rain that was, even then, pouring down the slope behind him to drown everything he had built. I think about that more than I think about almost anything. A man can do everything right, can read the land truer than every neighbor, can save his water while fools spill theirs, can plant for harvests he'll never see and hand his patience to a boy, and step into the light unarmed and turn back 4 men with a piece of fruit. A man can be wise in every way a man can be wise, and the world will still, in the end, send the rain at the wrong angle. There is no living so careful that it cannot be undone. The garden did not fail because he was a fool. It failed because he was alive, in a country that does not negotiate, and being alive is the one risk none of us gets to refuse. He did not rebuild it. He was too old and there was not time, and I think, though he never said it and I never asked, I think the drowning of it broke something in him that the drought never could, because the drought he had understood and prepared for, and the flood was a betrayal by the very rain he had prayed for. He stayed up in the broken country through that winter. The boy stayed with him. In the spring, the boy came down to my place alone, on foot, and stood in my yard turning his hat in his hands, and he did not have to say it. We buried him up on the rim, looking down into the hole where the mud had dried and cracked into those same gray plates the dead river wore, the plates I had buried Biscuit under, the desert's one signature, written everywhere. The boy and I dug the grave with our hands. It felt right to do it that way. It was how he had done everything. The boy planted the seed. I should tell you that because it is the only thing in this account that points forward instead of back. Dasodahi had wrapped the pits of his best peaches in damp cloth and hung them in the dark, the way he always did, the way he'd done for 30 years, planting for a harvest he'd never see, and the cloth survived the flood because he'd had it up high with him on the day the garden drowned. The boy took those seeds. He did not plant them in the old hole. The old hole was ruined, and besides, the boy had learned the real lesson, which was never about that one hole at all. He went looking, the way the old man must once have gone looking, for a low protected place, a fold of shade, a slow seep of stone water that the sun could not steal. He found one eventually. He is an old man himself now, or near it. I have not seen him in many years. But the last I heard, there is a green place up in the broken country, down out of the killing light, where peach trees grow in careful rows and bear fruit in a land that swears nothing can, and a man tends them slow, with a clay jar, planting for whoever comes. I am whoever came, so. I am an old man now too. I kept my herd in the end. The rains held the next year and the year after, and the valley filled back up with cattle and fences, and men certain the land owes a working man a fair shake. They have mostly forgotten the drought. The young ones do not believe it when I tell them the river ran dry, that you could walk across the San Pedro on the bones of it. They have forgotten the peach Indian entirely, or they tell it as a joke still, the fool who grew fruit in a hole, and I have stopped trying to correct them, because some things cannot be argued into a man, they have to be grown in him in the dark, where no one praises him for it. But I have a peach tree in my own yard now, just the one. It came from the boy, years back, a slip off one of his trees, which came from the seed, which came from the hole, which came from a man dead before either of us was born who left them for whoever came. It is not in a cave. I have no cave. I planted it on the north side of the house where the building throws shade through the worst of the afternoon, and I water it slow, a thin trickle into a little channel I dug, so the water walks sideways through the cool earth and finds the roots down low where the sun can't get at it. It is bearing this year, small and gold and flushed red on the sun side. I have not eaten one yet. I keep meaning to. Every evening I go out and I look at them in the long gold light, and I put my hand on the bark the way he put his hand on the mother tree, and I mean to pick one, and I find that I cannot, not yet, because of a thing he said to me once that I did not understand then and only half understand now. The water comes to find you, he said. You did not take it, so now it comes to find you. I am 81 years old and I think it is still coming. I think it has been coming all my life, slow, sideways, through the cool dark where I cannot see it, finding the roots of me down low. I think I will pick one tomorrow. I have been saying that for a while now.